I'm Bob Brill. He's Erik Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill, an NFL football podcast, and now a video cast as well. You can hear the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also see the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way. You see it right there on the bottom of your screen, kramerandbrill.com. Now, during the off season each week, we're taking a look at each NFL team as they prepare for the draft in the upcoming year. Well, this week's the draft. So this week, our guest is the man who became known as the first super agent, Leigh Steinberg. Leigh, a pleasure to have you with us and on our NFL draft show. No one knows NFL drafts like you, I dare say. You and I go back to my early days with UPI Radio Network and your days representing some of the top players in the NFL, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Mark Brunell, Warren Moon, Drew Bledsoe, Derek Thomas, and then more recently, Ben Roethlisberger and Lennox Lewis. You and I first met at the NFLPA Super Bowl party in 1986 when the Bears played the Patriots in New Orleans. And here we are today with the guy who eventually quarterbacked the Bears, my co-host, Erik Kramer. So it's kind of a small world, huh?
Oh, my goodness. That was my first quarterback in 1985 after that season. So I had Tony Eason in that game.
Oh, my gosh.
Against Chicago. And Willie Gault ran down the right sideline. They threw him a bomb, and the route was on. So it was a rude awakening having a quarterback in the Super Bowl.
Well, I remember telling some friends the night before that Tony Eason was going to be the key to that game. Turns out the wrong key, right? So before we get to the particular draft, I'd like to ask you, obviously as a player, you're anxious to hear your name called. But what's it like as an agent in that situation, let alone trying to keep your players calm?
So just remember that draft time is not real time. It's water torture time. Every second seems like a minute. Every minute seems like an hour. And so the fruition of years since Pop Warner are now coming of age Thursday night. And a player's surrounded by everyone in his life. They show you a sanitized picture on draft night of a player sitting with his parents. What they don't show you is the other 75 relatives, coaches, teammates that are also in the house. So what we've tried to do is the draft is all about key teams that have a special zest to draft your client. And if you can identify those teams prior to the draft, you can figure out where a player's likely to go and to give him those teams. So if you're sitting with Patrick Mahomes, we're pretty sure that Kansas City's going to trade above other teams. And if they don't take him, San Diego or the LA Chargers will take him. And if they don't take him, the Houston Texans will take him. So you know that, and you've tried to carefully prepare a player for that, so it shouldn't be an astounding shock as to where they go, because it's about teams. Having said that, the tension ratchets up immeasurably. And then you have the interminable wait through 10 minutes in the first round of teams drafting. Now, they've run through on a computer 100 scenarios which would be available when their pick comes. It's not like they've debated player versus player in what situation. They have all this. So what are they doing in those 10 minutes? They're trading and listening to trade concepts. So yeah, you're trying to keep a player loose, but notwithstanding that, the tension is palpable. You could cut it with a knife. And then he gets drafted and ecstasy bursts loose. It's unbelievable. It's rhapsodic joy.
Well, I'll say, Leigh, one player I didn't hear Bob list off that you had represented was a guy out of Pierce College here locally, me. And you wouldn't have wanted me, though, because I didn't get drafted. There would have been no tension in that room. In fact, there wasn't even a room I was sitting in. Some of us have to go around the back, sneak in the servants' quarters or entrance.
It's where you ended up. But
yeah,
you
right?
ended up in the right place with the
eventually, I guess some of us hang around long enough and they got to say yes. But But I was going to say, from an agent's perspective, how have you seen the NFL landscape change in the last decade with things like player benefits and contracts and labor issues, and now this new 17th game and the ramifications of it? Do you see, do you think it'll get worked out? Because it seems as though the CBA got worked out, signed, and then the 17th game came in. So is this likely to be just now divided up, the players' current salaries divided up into 18 checks instead of 17, or will this now in some way impact the revenue sharing between the owners and the players?
So let's remember there's a straight revenue shift that's 47% for players, 53% for management, except when they go to the 17th game, it becomes 48% and 52%. The important thing to remember is they just signed a new television contract in the midst of a cratered economy and a pandemic that goes up by 85% for each of the two big networks, and ESPN goes up by 35%. So obviously salaries will go up. Last year was a one-year blip with a reduced cap, but there are really happy days ahead. And the 17th game was collectively bargained and contemplated in this bargaining, so it is part of the collective bargaining agreement.
I want to talk a little bit about this draft too, Leigh. How in particular does this draft compare to the other, say, great drafts of the past?
First of all, we have a different system of scouting. So when I started with Steve Bartkowski back in 1975, he was drafted in January, and the draft was 17 rounds. So today it's in late April and it's 7 rounds. But the scouting system is much different because last year they had the scouting combine, the all-star games, but then no campus visits and no pro scouting days. This year, no combine. And so all the testing and everything had to be done on college campuses on pro scouting day. And so much less information. In addition, you have some players who opted out of this last year of playing because of the pandemic, and they only have, in some cases, a couple of years of game film. And then some conferences like the Pac-12 only played 4 or 5 games. So you have less film, but somehow you'll have the same amount of hits and misses. I can guarantee you that about a third of the first round, when you look back in 5 years, will have either underproduced or not be in the league. And that just happens whatever the system is. But this year is a star-studded draft with 4 quarterbacks who may go 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5th. It's loaded with wide receivers. It's loaded with skill position players. It's a draft that will be more entertaining for people because they'll know the players.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a life-changing 3 days, right, for all these players that come out of college. Thinking back again to when I was playing, it took 5 years to get vested for benefits and pensions and all that. Has the amount of years for that process been reduced for players? Does it still take 5 years, or has it been reduced in some way?
So it's 4 years, and now, and certain benefits get vested after 3 years. So you've got termination pay, you have a one-time severance pay, you have a number of different benefits, but you can't compare the ages because the money in football coming in revenue has exploded so dramatically. So we have fantasy football with 40 million people playing. We have new stadia with jumbo scoreboards and naming rights and premium seating and luxury boxes and ancillary revenue stream. We have memorabilia going crazy. We just did a NFT event with Patrick Mahomes where he sold a group of paintings and photographs that only exist on your computer. And he made about $3.5 million in 20 minutes. So it's sort of a brave new world. Back when you were playing, Erik, I don't think that you tweeted out or had, social.
I'm not sure there were cell phones back then, Leigh.
Yeah, saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths were circling the earth at that point. But so today, players have dramatically higher profile. The quarterbacks, your position has become the new movie stars. Remember that football by 3-1, the NFL is the most popular sport. It's also the most popular television shows. 71 of the Nielsen highest rated shows were all NFL football.
You mentioned the NFT thing and blockchains. It just amazes me that somebody like LeBron James or Patrick Mahomes or somebody can have a play that's like a GIF or a meme that they can blockchain, mint it as an NFT, and make millions of dollars off it, or some degree of money. It just doesn't kind of compute in the world of sports to me.
Yes, but remember that when some of us were growing up, we got on the phone, and if you were on the phone and someone called you, it rang busy. There were phone booths that you dropped money into. There was no computer. There was no cell phones. There was nothing. This period tests your adaptivity and flexibility to change.
If you could, Leigh, you talked about earlier the 4 quarterbacks and 5 if you include Mac Jones in there. Is there any 1 or 2 that you see, how you talked about a third of these first rounders may not even be in the league in a few years? Is there anybody in this particular group that you see standing out and then, say, within that same time period, become the next Patrick Mahomes?
So, Erik, what you know, but is hard to explain, is the elevation that occurs between college and pro football. The game's faster, the players are better, the degree of separation is less. And the only way to master that is to have the field slow down, which happens by playing and happens by seeing the field a number of different times. So much will depend on what situations each of these quarterbacks go into. Do they have a good offensive line? Do they have good skill position players? Are they coached well? Do they give them enough time? Because what happens today is if you get someone pressed into starting, then they're not going to be their absolute best. Now, Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert looked pretty good last year, and so they could confuse you, but that's not the normal developmental chain. And so it takes a while. So you have to see where Trevor Lawrence goes or where Mac Jones goes and what the system is. Patrick Mahomes had the great benefit, as did Carson Palmer and Aaron Rodgers and a whole series of quarterbacks, of sitting for the first year. So part of the question is, are they forced into service year one? And do they create enough climate so that if they lose a couple games, they throw some bad picks, people don't look at them as busts and retard their development? So all of those quarterbacks should be good. Trevor Lawrence is pretty much a can't miss. Zach Jones, and he figures to go to Jacksonville. Zach Jones figures to go to the New York Jets. And now you're up at the 49ers, and did they take Mac Jones or did they take Justin Fields, right? And it just depends. Does Atlanta go for a quarterback at the number 4 position? So what you need to see is what situations they arrive in. What I learned after almost 50 years is that the key to winning in football is the organization. So it's, do they have stable ownership with long-term vision? Do they have really talented people in the front office? Do they have a great coach? And so a player who goes into a system like that will be more productive. And a player, look at Sam Darnold. I still believe Sam Darnold can be a quality quarterback, but it was hard to see it because he was playing for the Jets, and they've already given up on him.
One of the things that seems to have changed over the last few years, if not the last decade, is the de-emphasis of the running backs compared to other positions. And I know we're talking usually in the past you'd see running backs go easily in the first round. We may not have a running back picked in the first round. We may have 2, but more than that, we're going to see offensive linemen go well above running backs. And I guess what I'm wondering is this because of the de-emphasis or the emphasis on the mobile quarterbacks, or is there something else?
It's all the advent of the modern passing game, because in the yesteryear of football, teams ran on first down, they ran on second, and maybe they threw on third if they were willing to risk it. And today we have a wide open passing game. It still is critical to have the running game, but about 10 years ago, teams started to see that they could get a great running back in a lower round, and that and running backs don't last that long, so they sort of fell out of favor. But they've started being picked in the first round again, and I think the balance is back. Woe to the quarterback who has to stand back there and pass every down and has nothing to take the defense away from him. He'd just be eviscerated because of the edge rush. So I think they're coming back. They're coming back into a style. And if you look at Super Bowl type teams, they all have reasonable running backs.
You look at some of all the rule changes that have ever occurred in the NFL are always to benefit more scoring in the offense. With any of the recent ones you've seen in the last couple of years, which one, if there's more than one, fine, but is there any that stick out to you as, okay, this is going to change the game significantly?
It's the protection that's being given to players, which mostly is a function of concussion and the fear of, remember, we have bigger, stronger, faster bodies, and the G-force of the line of scrimmage is different. I knew that the first time I represented an offensive tackle who weighed 375 pounds, was 6'6", and ran a 4.8 40. We never imagined that the physics of the hit would go this way. So it's become such a quarterback-centric game that they especially want protection of them, wide receivers, but the specter of concussion, the fact that 3 or more can give a player an exponentially higher rate of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression, has forced the league to do things. And I think it'll evolve, Erik, to the point where there's no hitting in training camp. There's no hitting during practice. They just model the plays, which we've already seen in college football, and they save the hitting for the games.
Is there one thought in your mind as far as a player or a team that is going to make a big surprise or have a big surprise or selection or whatever that is, is going to kind of set this draft apart and say, oh my gosh, this is something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life?
I think the amount of, if you think back to 1983, you can remember a draft that had Dan Marino as the last of 6 drafted quarterbacks, and it had John Elway, who's in the Hall of Fame, and it had Dan Marino's in the Hall of Fame, and it had Jim Kelly, who's in the Hall of Fame, and Tony Eason and Ken O'Brien played pretty well and made Pro Bowls. So I think that this run of quarterbacks is what you want to watch, because people will then look back on it and say, oh my goodness, that 2021, that was the year of the quarterback.
Kind of look at the, some of the teams you had mentioned earlier with Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. I look at the Chargers as that team that they shocked the world last year, me included. And I think what Justin Herbert brought along, what I think his play helped show that the rest of the team's pretty damn good too. They seem to me to be, anyway, for me this year, the dark horse, if there is one, that could surprise a lot of folks, or maybe not surprise a lot of folks, but still have a very successful season doing it. Would you, I guess, agree with that? Or is there another team out there that you think might make even a bigger jump?
Well, last year, no one would have picked Tampa to be the Super Bowl winner. They thought that Brady and the resurgence of Gronkowski would greatly improve the team, but no one thought they'd go all the way there. San Diego, I still call them the San Diego Chargers, the LA Chargers, and try Las Vegas Raiders on. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, they were much better than their record last year, and they just had some unfortunate games. But I agree with you, and you know what it shows is the critical importance of the franchise quarterback. And today, if a team doesn't have one that you can build around for 10 to 12 years, that you can win because of rather than with, and critically, someone who in adversity, he's thrown a couple interceptions, the game's getting out of hand, the center's looking at the quarterback like he's on hallucinogens for his play calls, and the fans are growing restive and start to boo. What does he do then? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, elevate his level of play, and take a team to and through victory? And we're seeing that if you don't have one, you better find one. And if you have one, you better hang on to them.
If the Chargers might have made the Super Bowl if their games were only 55 minutes last year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Starting with the first game against Kansas City, right?
Yeah. I got to ask you, as far as franchises go, what do you consider the best franchise in the NFL in terms of, easy to negotiate with, as where a player can make the most of his career, maybe best in taking care of its players? Is there one franchise or maybe two that stand out to you?
Well, look, the whole key is, again, the quality of ownership, front office, and the rest of it. I mean, you have to give it to the New England Patriots. The whole system is designed to create parity. That's why we have reverse order in the draft. That's why we have a salary cap that makes teams discard good players. That's why we have free agency. It's all designed for parity. When the team goes that many years coming up against it, I mean, and still, until last year, was in the Super Bowl hunt every single year. I mean, that just like Buffalo back in the old days, although they didn't win them. But that's a well-run franchise. A team like the Pittsburgh Steelers is a well-run franchise. Players play better because they're there.
Eric's laughing because he knows I'm a Steeler fan.
Did you see?
He was wondering when the Steelers were going to be brought up. So
Bob's smile just cracked my screen when you said that.
So but a team like that has stability at the ownership level. They have stability at the coaching level. They have the same front office, and they don't. Every time you go through a dramatic coach switch or executive switch, you got to rebuild and start again, and it destabilizes players. So what you're looking for is San Francisco 49ers now are a very well-run franchise. They have my ex-client John Lynch as GM. They have a good coach. The Rams are a well-run franchise, but again, because they have stability and the rest of it. And any team that wins the Super Bowl is a well-run franchise.
Yeah, I'm wondering myself, because you mentioned, of course, the Patriots and Bill Belichick, and how for more than two decades now, they've kind of set the bar, set the standard for at least modern day NFL execution and organization and success. Is there sort of a team, a next coach, a next organization that you see stepping up, sort of taking up that slack? Or if there isn't even going to be any slack, like, is there a team that you look at and say, hey, from top to bottom, young coach, young energetic ownership or administration, and this is a team that I think is headed in to the top of the league and going to be there for a while?
Well, I think the dominant team is Kansas City, and they lost both tackles before they go into a game in which the quarterback just had no time to do anything. But I think that they are really well run, and the fact they lost the Super Bowl last year, my expectation is they'll be right back in it and continue, so that I see Kansas City as sort of the inheritor from the New England Patriots, because they are loaded. And again, you go into a Super Bowl and you lose the two key pass protectors, it's going to be difficult. It would be difficult enough to win if you had them. It's impossible to win without them. But keep your eye on the fact they're just going to keep rolling. And it'll be interesting to see how Tampa Bay does. It's tough for a Super Bowl team because all of the players start to come of age cap-wise. It's difficult to keep the whole squad together. The players are overvalued in free agency because they just came off a Super Bowl team. The system's designed so they don't repeat, and they just had an off season, which is festive. So we'll see how they do.
You can tell how much Lee likes the Chiefs due to the fact that he's flanked both sides with Patrick Mahomes pictures in his office. Yeah. I know we have to wrap this up. Lee, I have one final question I wanted to ask you. And you kind of addressed this earlier, and that's with the technology and the information out there that the teams have going into a draft. Is it difficult for a team to miss a future star player? I mean, I look back at Erik, for instance, when undrafted, ended up playing 12 years in the NFL, still holds the Bears team records for passing in a season. Obviously, a whole lot of folks missed his talent in the selection process. Is it difficult for that to happen today?
No, it's not difficult to miss because, among other things, the scouting system now prizes the testables that are done at the combine. So it's how fast this wide receiver runs. It's how fast the defensive back or the running back run. Can they catch the ball? Can they, actually run from scrimmage? Can the linebacker actually find the ball? So it doesn't test those things. Someone will have a meteoric 40 and jump up the draft charts, but they don't have a work ethic, or they don't have an instinctive eye for the ball. So the point is, you could easily miss a quarterback by not projecting him correctly. Look at the teams starting in Mahomes' year that had him as sort of a third rounder or second rounder because he was a gunslinger. So the point is, it's all about a projection as to what the player is going to be like for the 10 to 12 years. And other than game film, you can't see that Erik, in a time of crisis, is going to elevate his level of play as opposed to get flustered. And maybe you can see a little bit on game film, but then you have to project the player over the next 10 to 12 years. They miss players all the time, which is why it's sort of sad that the XFL and the AAF and teams like leagues like that went away, because I mean, it goes back to Kurt Warner, who is playing in the Arena League and ends up MVP. So you can clearly, players are missed all the time. I guarantee you'll see players drafted in the 4th or 5th round on Friday who end up being great pros. I had a series of linebackers, and I knew they were not going to get drafted. I knew they'd be great players. We had someone named Lance Briggs, who couldn't run a fast 40. Neither could Jayon Brown. They just happened to be spectacular ball hawks and really play the game of football well.
Great. Leigh, it's been a pleasure having you with us. I thank you for coming on. Our guest this week, Sports Agent Leigh Steinberg, and we're discussing the NFL draft. And there you have it, Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast, and now a video cast as well. You can hear the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts. Now you can also see the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel, or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way. You see it right there on the bottom of your screen. For our guest, Leigh Steinberg, my friend and colleague, Erik Kramer, I'm Bob Brill, and we'll see you next time.